The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Eldermere Castle like a shroud of uncertainty. King Alexander stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the first rays of sunlight struggle to penetrate the grey Scottish Highlands. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held the medical report that would change everything for his family. Queen Isabella entered quietly, her silk slippers making no sound on the Persian carpet. Even after 25 years of marriage, she could read her husband's moods like pages in a familiar book. The tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the papers, the slight downturn of his mouth, all spoke of devastating news. "The results came back," Alexander said without turning around. His voice carried the weight of a man who had spent his life making impossible decisions, but this one felt different. This one was personal. Isabella moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his arm. "Tell me." "Prince Marcus has the same condition his grandfather had. The doctors confirmed it yesterday evening." Alexander's voice cracked slightly on their youngest son's name. At only 8 years old, Marcus was the light of their lives, intelligent beyond his years, compassionate, and filled with the kind of joy that made even the most hardened palace staff smile. The hereditary neurological condition had claimed Alexander's father at the age of 42, leaving behind a young family and a kingdom in mourning. The disease was progressive, cruel in its slow advance, and there was no cure. The royal physicians had been monitoring Marcus for months after he began showing early symptoms, the occasional tremor in his left hand, moments of confusion that seemed unusual for a child his age. Isabella sank into the leather chair behind Alexander's desk, her composure finally breaking. She had suspected this day might come, had prepared herself mentally for years, but nothing could have readied her for the actual moment. "How long do we have?" "The progression varies. Some patients live normal lifespans with proper management. Others..." Alexander couldn't finish the sentence. The unspoken words hung between them like a death sentence. Outside, the grounds of Eldermere were coming alive with the morning routine. Gardeners tended to the rose beds that Isabella had planted when they first moved to the castle. Kitchen staff prepared breakfast for the royal family, unaware that their world was about to shift dramatically. Security personnel conducted their usual patrols, protecting a family that was now facing an enemy they couldn't guard against. "We have to tell the children," Isabella said, though her voice suggested she dreaded the conversation more than anything she had ever faced as queen. "Charlotte and Edmund deserve to know. They've noticed Marcus has been different lately." Princess Charlotte, at 16, was perceptive and mature beyond her years. She had inherited her mother's intuition and her father's sense of responsibility. Prince Edmund, 14, was more like Marcus, optimistic and energetic, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. Both children adored their younger brother and had been protective of him since birth. Alexander finally turned from the window, and Isabella saw the full extent of his anguish reflected in his eyes. This was not just a king worried about succession or public perception. This was a father watching his child face an uncertain future, knowing that all the power and privilege in the world couldn't change the diagnosis. "There's more," Alexander said, settling into the chair across from his wife. "Dr. Pemberton believes we should consider making the diagnosis public. The transparency could help other families dealing with the same condition. Marcus could become an advocate, help fund research." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. The royal family had always maintained a careful balance between public service and private life. Revealing Marcus's condition would mean subjecting him to intense media scrutiny, public sympathy, and the constant pressure of being seen as the sick prince. Yet it could also provide hope and resources for countless other families. "He's 8 years old, Alexander. He should be worrying about his mathematics lessons and whether he'll make the cricket team, not about becoming the poster child for a degenerative disease." Isabella's voice carried a mother's fierce protectiveness. "But if we stay silent, if we try to hide this, what message does that send? That there's shame in illness? That royal blood should somehow make us immune to human suffering?" Alexander had clearly been wrestling with these questions all night. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Through the windows, they could see Marcus in the distance, playing with the family's golden retriever, Braveheart, on the castle's vast lawn. His laughter carried on the morning breeze, a sound that had always filled their hearts with joy but now carried an undertone of heartbreak. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier. Every decision they made as monarchs affected millions of people, but this decision would primarily impact their son's quality of life. How could they balance their duty to the kingdom with their responsibility as parents? Isabella stood and walked to Alexander's desk, pulling out a sheet of the royal stationery. "We need to make a list," she said, her voice steadying as she shifted into the practical mode that had served her well as queen. "We need to understand our options completely before we make any decisions. Options for treatment, options for schooling, options for public disclosure," Alexander agreed, grateful for his wife's methodical approach. "We need to speak with specialists beyond our royal physicians. We need second opinions, third opinions if necessary." As Isabella began writing, Alexander's mind wandered to his own father's battle with the same condition. King Henry had been diagnosed at 38, and the royal family had kept the illness completely secret until his death 4 years later. The official cause of death had been listed as a heart attack, and the truth had died with him. Alexander had always wondered if things might have been different if they had sought more aggressive treatment, if they had been willing to look beyond the traditional royal physicians. "We should call Dr. Sarah Chin in London," Isabella suggested, her pen moving steadily across the paper. "She's leading the research consortium on neurological conditions. I met her at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala last year." "And Dr. Hoffman in Switzerland," Alexander added. "His clinic has been developing some promising experimental treatments." The list grew longer as they thought of specialists, treatment centers, and research facilities around the world. Money would not be an obstacle, they could afford the best care available anywhere. But they both knew that sometimes the best care wasn't enough. A soft knock at the door interrupted their planning. "Come in," Alexander called. Lady Margaret Thornfield, Isabella's private secretary and closest friend, entered with a tea service. She had been with the royal household for 15 years and had become almost like family. Her discretion was absolute, and both Alexander and Isabella trusted her completely. "Your Majesties," she said quietly, setting down the tray. "I apologize for the interruption, but you have several appointments this morning. The Prime Minister is expected at 10, and there's the ceremony for the new children's wing at the hospital at 2. Alexander and Isabella exchanged glances. The irony of dedicating a children's hospital wing on the same day they learned of their own child's diagnosis was not lost on them. "Cancel my morning appointments," Alexander said. "Reschedule the Prime Minister for tomorrow." "And the hospital ceremony?" Lady Margaret asked gently. "We'll attend," Isabella said firmly. "Those children and their families need our support. We can't let our personal situation affect our public duties." She paused, then added, "Not yet, anyway." After Lady Margaret left, Alexander and Isabella returned to their planning, but the interruption had reminded them that their lives belonged not just to themselves and their family, but to the entire kingdom. Every decision they made would ripple outward, affecting not just Marcus but potentially millions of people who looked to the royal family for stability and hope. The morning sun had finally burned away the mist, and the castle grounds were now bright and clear. From their window, they could see Marcus chasing Braveheart around the fountain, his movements still fluid and natural despite the diagnosis. For now, he was simply a happy 8-year-old boy playing with his dog, unaware that his parents were upstairs planning for a future that might be drastically different from what they had all imagined. "We need to tell him first," Isabella said finally. "Before we make any other decisions, Marcus needs to know what's happening to him. He's young, but he's not stupid. He's probably already sensed that something is wrong." Alexander nodded, though the thought of that conversation filled him with dread. How do you explain to a child that his body might betray him? How do you maintain hope while preparing for the worst? "Tonight," he agreed. "After dinner, we'll talk to all 3 children together. Charlotte and Edmund will help us figure out how to support Marcus through this." As they continued their planning, both Alexander and Isabella held on to the image of their son playing in the sunshine, storing it in their hearts like a treasure. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family, with all the love, resources, and determination they could muster. The crown might be heavy, but their love for Marcus was stronger than any burden they would have to bear. The children's hospital ceremony proceeded with the polished precision that characterized all royal events, but, for King Alexander and Queen Isabella, every moment felt surreal. They smiled for photographs, cut ribbons, and spoke with young patients and their families, all while carrying the weight of Marcus's diagnosis like a stone in their hearts. Princess Charlotte noticed immediately that something was wrong. As they walked through the pediatric ward, she observed her parents with the keen eye of a teenager who had grown up watching them navigate public appearances. Her mother's smile was too bright, too forced, and her father's usual easy rapport with children seemed strained. The new wing will serve over 3,000 children annually, Dr. Patricia Westbrook, the hospital's chief administrator, explained as they toured the state-of-the-art facilities. The neurological unit alone will triple our capacity to help children with complex conditions. Isabella's step faltered slightly at the mention of the neurological unit, and Charlotte caught her mother's arm. "Are you feeling all right, Mum?" "Just a bit tired, darling," Isabella replied, but Charlotte's concerned expression suggested she wasn't convinced. When they returned to Eldermere Castle that evening, the family gathered for dinner in the smaller dining room they used for informal meals. Prince Edmund regaled them with stories from his cricket practice, while Princess Charlotte discussed her upcoming art exhibition at school. Prince Marcus, seemingly unaware of the tension that had gripped his parents all day, chattered excitedly about a book he was reading about knights and dragons. "The knight in the story has to face a dragon that no one else can see," Marcus explained, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "But just because other people can't see it doesn't mean it isn't real and dangerous." Alexander and Isabella exchanged meaningful glances across the table. Even in his innocence, Marcus seemed to be speaking directly to their situation. After dinner, as was their tradition, the family moved to the library where they would spend time together before the children's bedtime. The room was Isabella's favorite in the entire castle, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, furnished with comfortable chairs arranged around a massive stone fireplace. Tonight, however, the usual warmth and comfort of the space felt heavy with anticipation. "Children, your father and I need to discuss something important with you," Isabella began, her voice steady but gentle. Charlotte immediately straightened in her chair, her intuition confirming that her observations throughout the day had been correct. Marcus looked up from the puzzle he had been working on, his expression curious but unconcerned. Edmund set down his handheld gaming device, giving his parents his full attention. "Is this about why you've been acting strange all day?" Charlotte asked directly. At 16, she had little patience for prolonged suspense. Alexander leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. "Marcus, you know how you've been having some problems with your hand shaking sometimes? And how you've been feeling confused or dizzy occasionally?" Marcus nodded slowly. "The doctors have been doing lots of tests." "Well, the doctors have figured out what's been causing those problems," Isabella continued. "You have a condition called Huntington's disease. It's something that runs in our family, your grandfather had it too." The explanation that followed was careful and age-appropriate, but honest. They explained that the condition would likely get worse over time, that there wasn't a cure yet, but that there were treatments that could help. They assured Marcus that they would find the best doctors in the world to help him, and that nothing would change how much they loved him. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears that she tried unsuccessfully to hide. Edmund moved closer to Marcus on the sofa, putting a protective arm around his younger brother. Marcus himself seemed to process the information with surprising calm. "Will I die?" he asked simply. The directness of the question took Alexander's breath away. "We don't know what the future holds, son. But we're going to do everything possible to make sure you have a long, happy life." "Am I still going to be able to go to school with my friends?" Marcus asked. "For now, yes," Isabella replied. "As long as you feel well enough and want to continue, you'll keep going to school just like always." "Will I still be a prince when I grow up?" This question struck at the heart of one of Alexander and Isabella's deepest concerns. The line of succession meant that Marcus, as the youngest child, was unlikely to inherit the throne under normal circumstances. But his diagnosis raised complex questions about his future role in the royal family. "You will always be our son and always be a prince," Alexander said firmly. "Nothing about your diagnosis changes how important you are to this family or to our kingdom." Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. "What can Edmund and I do to help?" The question revealed the depth of her character and the strong bond between the siblings. Rather than focusing on her own fears or concerns, her immediate instinct was to support her brother. "Just keep being his big sister," Isabella replied. "Keep including him in everything you do, keep treating him normally. The best thing for Marcus is to have as normal a childhood as possible." Edmund nodded vigorously. "We're going to beat this thing, Marcus. We're going to find doctors who can fix it." Marcus smiled at his brother's determination. "Maybe by the time I'm really sick, they'll have figured out how to cure dragon diseases." The adults in the room recognized the wisdom in Marcus's childlike metaphor. He had somehow understood that this was his dragon to face, and he was already showing a resilience that both amazed and heartbroken his parents. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Alexander and Isabella met with their most trusted advisors in the castle's secure conference room. Prime Minister James Morrison had been briefed on the situation and had driven up from London for an emergency meeting. Also present were Sir David Pemberton, the royal family's personal physician, Lady Margaret Thornfield, and Robert Chen, the head of royal security. The immediate question, Prime Minister Morrison began, is whether and when to make a public announcement. "There are significant implications either way." Sir David spread several medical journals across the conference table. "I've been in contact with specialists around the world today. There are several promising research tracks, but they all require significant funding. A public announcement could potentially accelerate research efforts. But it would also subject Marcus to intense scrutiny for the rest of his life," Lady Margaret pointed out. "Every public appearance, every photograph, every milestone would be viewed through the lens of his condition." Robert Chen cleared his throat. "From a security perspective, a public announcement could actually be beneficial. It would explain any changes in Marcus's schedule or capabilities without raising questions about other possible issues." Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decision. "What about the precedent? If we announce Marcus's diagnosis, does that mean every royal family member's medical information becomes public property?" "Not necessarily," Prime Minister Morrison replied. "We could frame this as a specific decision based on the potential public benefit, rather than establishing a general policy." Isabella had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, but now she spoke up. "I keep thinking about the families we met at the hospital today. If Marcus's story could help other children and their parents feel less alone, don't we have an obligation to share it?" "But we also have an obligation to protect our son's privacy and childhood," Alexander countered. The debate continued for hours, with valid arguments on all sides. They discussed the potential impact on charitable fundraising, the precedent it would set for royal privacy, the effect on Marcus's education and social development, and the broader implications for public perception of the monarchy. Dr. Sarah Chen joined the meeting via video conference from London, providing additional medical perspective. "The research community is closer than ever to breakthrough treatments," she explained. "But we need more funding and more public awareness. A high-profile case like Prince Marcus could be transformative for the entire field." "What would that mean for Marcus personally?" Isabella asked. "He could become one of the first children to benefit from new gene therapies that are currently in development. But, more importantly, his participation in research could help develop treatments that save thousands of other children." The meeting concluded near midnight without a final decision, but with a clearer understanding of the options and their implications. Alexander and Isabella agreed to take several more days to consider their choice, consulting with additional specialists and carefully weighing the competing interests involved. As they walked back to their private quarters through the castle's ancient corridors, Isabella voiced the thought that had been haunting her all day. "What if we're wrong? What if keeping this private is actually the selfish choice, and going public is what's best for Marcus and other children? Or what if going public destroys his chance at a normal childhood, and we can never undo that decision," Alexander replied. They paused outside Marcus's bedroom door, listening to the soft sound of his breathing. Inside, their 8-year-old son slept peacefully, unaware of the momentous decision his parents were grappling with on his behalf. "Tomorrow we start calling specialists," Isabella decided. "We get every opinion we can, we explore every treatment option, and we make the best decision we can with the information we have." Alexander nodded, taking his wife's hand. "And, whatever we decide, we face it together as a family." In the days that followed, Eldermere Castle became the center of a discreet flurry of activity. Medical specialists flew in for consultations, research reports arrived by secure courier, and encrypted video conferences connected the royal family with experts around the world. Throughout it all, Marcus continued his normal routine, attending his tutoring sessions, playing with his siblings, and showing remarkable resilience in the face of his diagnosis. The decision about whether to make the diagnosis public became more complex as they learned more about Marcus's specific situation. Some doctors recommended immediate aggressive treatment, while others suggested a wait-and-see approach. Some believed public disclosure would be beneficial for research, while others worried about the psychological impact on a young patient. Princess Charlotte had taken on an increasingly protective role with Marcus, often staying close during his tutoring sessions and making sure he wasn't overexerting himself during physical activities. Prince Edmund had thrown himself into researching Huntington's disease, determined to understand everything he could about his brother's condition. The weight of the secret was taking its toll on the entire family. Public appearances became exercises in careful performance, with each family member working to maintain the appearance of normalcy while privately grappling with fear, uncertainty, and the pressure of making decisions that could affect not just Marcus's life, but potentially the lives of countless other families dealing with the same condition. As they approached the end of their first week living with the diagnosis, Alexander and Isabella knew they would soon have to make their choice. The medical consultations were providing valuable information, but they were also highlighting just how much was still unknown about Marcus's future and the best way to help him face it. 2 weeks after the diagnosis, Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Barcelona Institute of Neurological Sciences arrived at Eldermere Castle with news that would change everything. Her research team had developed a revolutionary gene therapy that showed unprecedented promise in early trials, but they needed a young patient who met very specific criteria to move forward with human testing. Prince Marcus fit the profile perfectly. The therapy involves introducing modified genes that can potentially halt or even reverse the progression of Huntington's disease, Dr. Vasquez explained during a private meeting with Alexander and Isabella in the castle's medical suite. But the treatment is most effective when administered before significant symptoms develop, which makes Marcus an ideal candidate. Sir David Pemberton leaned forward intently. "What are the risks involved?" "As with any experimental treatment, there are unknowns," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "The therapy has been successful in laboratory settings and in early animal trials, but Marcus would be among the first human subjects. There could be unforeseen side effects or complications." Isabella felt her heart racing. After days of consulting with specialists who offered varying degrees of hope, here was someone presenting what sounded like a potential cure. But the prospect of making Marcus a test subject for unproven treatments was terrifying. "What would the treatment involve?" Alexander asked. "A series of specialized injections over several months, combined with intensive monitoring and follow-up care. Marcus would need to spend significant time at our facility in Barcelona, away from his normal environment and routine." The room fell silent as Alexander and Isabella absorbed the implications. This could be the breakthrough they had been praying for, but it would mean uprooting Marcus's life and subjecting him to experimental procedures with no guarantee of success. "How long do we have to make a decision?" Isabella asked. "The window for optimal effectiveness is relatively narrow," Dr. Vasquez replied. "If you choose to proceed, we would need to begin treatment within the next month." After Dr. Vasquez left, Alexander and Isabella sat in stunned silence. The possibility of a cure changed everything, but it also raised new and complex questions. Should they risk experimental treatment that could have unknown consequences, or should they focus on helping Marcus live as normal a life as possible with current management strategies?
That evening, they called an emergency family meeting.
Princess Charlotte and Prince Edmund had been following their parents' meetings with various specialists, and both had matured considerably in the weeks since learning about Marcus's diagnosis. "There's a doctor who thinks she might be able to cure the dragon disease," Isabella explained to Marcus, using the metaphor that had become their family's way of discussing his condition. Marcus looked up from his drawing tablet with bright interest.
"Really? Like with magic medicine?"
"Sort of like magic medicine," Alexander agreed. "But it would mean going to a special hospital in another country for several months, and trying treatments that no other children have tried before." Charlotte immediately grasped the significance of what her parents were describing.
"You mean he would be like a test subject?"
"In a sense, yes," Isabella acknowledged. "But the doctor believes the treatment could stop the disease from getting worse, or even make it go away completely."
Edmund, ever practical despite his youth, asked the crucial question: what happens if the treatment doesn't work? Or if it makes things worse? Alexander appreciated his son's directness. "Those are the risks we have to consider very carefully.
The treatment could help Marcus tremendously, but there could also be side effects we don't know about yet." Marcus set down his tablet and looked seriously at his family.
"If I do the magic medicine, will it help other kids who have dragon diseases too?"
The question revealed a maturity and compassion that took the adults by surprise. Even at 8 years old, Marcus understood that his decision could impact more than just himself.
"Yes," Isabella said softly.
"If the treatment works for you, it could help many other children and their families." "Then, I want to try the magic medicine," Marcus said simply.
"I want to help the other kids fight their dragons." The family spent the next several hours discussing the practical implications of pursuing experimental treatment. Marcus would need to take a break from his regular schooling, though tutors could continue his education in Barcelona.
The entire family would need to relocate temporarily to Spain, which would require complex arrangements for Alexander's royal duties. Charlotte surprised everyone by suggesting she take a gap year before university to support Marcus through his treatment. "My acceptance to Cambridge can be deferred," she said matter-of-factly.
"Marcus is more important than my academic timeline."
Edmund, not to be outdone by his sister's sacrifice, proposed that he could complete his studies through distance learning from Barcelona.
"We stick together as a family," he declared. "That's what royal families do." The next morning brought an unexpected complication.
A photographer from a tabloid newspaper had somehow obtained images of Dr. Vasquez entering the castle, along with photographs of several other medical specialists who had visited in recent weeks. The photos were accompanied by speculation about a mysterious illness affecting a member of the royal family. Lady Margaret Thornfield delivered the news during the family's breakfast, her expression grim as she placed the newspaper on the table.
"The story is already being picked up by other media outlets.
We're going to need to make a statement soon, or the speculation will become uncontrollable." Alexander studied the photographs with growing frustration. The privacy they had been desperately trying to maintain was crumbling despite their best efforts.
How did they know about the medical consultations?
"It's possible someone at one of the hospitals leaked information, or they could have been monitoring the castle's visitor logs," Robert Chen explained.
"Either way, the secret is effectively out." Isabella felt a surge of protective anger.
They had been trying so hard to shield Marcus from public scrutiny, and now strangers were speculating about his health in newspapers that would be read by millions of people.
"What do we do now?"
Charlotte asked, reading the newspaper article with obvious distress.
"Now we take control of the narrative," Alexander decided.
"If the story is going to become public regardless of our wishes, we need to tell it ourselves, on our own terms." The family spent the rest of the morning crafting a strategy for public disclosure. Rather than simply releasing a dry medical statement, they decided to frame Marcus's story as one of hope and determination. They would announce his diagnosis along with his decision to participate in cutting-edge research that could help other children facing the same battle. Prime Minister Morrison arrived that afternoon to help coordinate the announcement with government communications teams. The palace's press office began preparing materials that would accompany the official statement, including information about Huntington's disease and the research efforts Marcus would be supporting. We want to control the timing and the message, Morrison explained. A carefully planned announcement will serve Marcus's interests much better than allowing the tabloids to drive the story with speculation and rumors. Isabella agreed, though she felt heartsick about losing the last vestiges of Marcus's privacy. At least this way, we can make sure the focus is on hope and research rather than tragedy and pity. Dr. Vasquez, who had remained in London to coordinate with other researchers, joined them via video conference to discuss how Marcus's participation in the experimental treatment would be presented to the public. The research community is extremely excited about the potential breakthrough, she explained. Prince Marcus's participation could accelerate our timeline by years and bring hope to thousands of families worldwide. Marcus himself seemed remarkably untroubled by the prospect of public attention. During a family discussion about the announcement, he expressed mainly curiosity about whether other children would want to write him letters about their own dragon diseases. Maybe we could start a club, he suggested earnestly. For kids who are fighting invisible dragons. We could share tips about being brave and help each other when the dragons are being especially mean. His innocent suggestion sparked an idea that would eventually become a central part of their public awareness campaign. The palace communications team began developing plans for a foundation that would support both research and family resources for children with neurological conditions. As the day of the announcement approached, the family gathered in Alexander's study for a final review of their statement. The text struck a careful balance between honesty about Marcus's diagnosis and optimism about the treatment opportunities ahead. We want people to understand that this is not a tragedy, Isabella emphasized as they reviewed the draft. This is a family facing a challenge with courage, hope, and determination to help others. Charlotte had suggested including a section about how the diagnosis had brought their family closer together and strengthened their commitment to charitable work supporting medical research. Edmund contributed language emphasizing the importance of funding scientific studies that could benefit children around the world. Marcus's main contribution was insisting that the statement include his invitation for other children with similar conditions to write to him. I want them to know they're not fighting their dragons alone, he explained. The announcement was scheduled for the following morning, with a coordinated release across all major media outlets. Dr. Vasquez would simultaneously announce the experimental treatment program from Barcelona, emphasizing the scientific significance of Marcus's participation. That evening, as the family spent their last night before becoming public advocates for Huntington's disease research, they gathered in the library for what had become their nightly tradition of reading together. Tonight, Marcus had chosen a book about a young knight who discovered that the dragon he had been fighting was actually trying to protect the kingdom from a greater evil. Sometimes the things that seem scary turn out to be trying to help us, Marcus observed as Alexander finished reading the story. Isabella hugged her youngest son tightly, marveling at his wisdom and resilience. Tomorrow would bring unprecedented public attention and scrutiny, but tonight they were simply a family reading stories together by the fireplace. Are you ready for tomorrow? Charlotte asked her little brother. Marcus nodded confidently. I'm ready to help fight dragons for all the other kids. And maybe the dragons will turn out to be helpers in disguise, just like in the story. As they prepared for bed, Alexander and Isabella reflected on how much their lives had changed since that morning 2 weeks ago when they first learned of Marcus's diagnosis. What had begun as their worst nightmare was evolving into an opportunity to make a difference for countless other families. The burden of the crown had become a platform for hope. The next morning would mark the beginning of a new chapter for their family, one that would be lived in the public eye but with a purpose that extended far beyond their own personal struggles. Marcus's dragon would become a symbol of courage for children around the world, and his family would stand with him as he faced whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning of the announcement dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was offering encouragement for the difficult day ahead. At precisely 9 o'clock, King Alexander and Queen Isabella appeared before the assembled media at Eldermere Castle, flanked by their 3 children in a show of family unity that would be broadcast around the world. Marcus stood between his parents, his small hand clasped in his mother's, looking remarkably composed for an 8-year-old about to become the focus of international attention. Princess Charlotte and Prince Edmund flanked their younger brother protectively, their faces reflecting a maturity that their ages belied. Good morning, Alexander began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment.
My family and I want to share some important news with you today.
3 weeks ago, we learned that our youngest son, Prince Marcus, has been diagnosed with Huntington's disease, the same condition that affected my late father. The silence in the courtyard was complete, broken only by the clicking of camera shutters and the soft whir of television cameras. Isabella stepped forward to continue the prepared statement. While this news was initially overwhelming for our family, we want to emphasize that this is not a story of tragedy, but one of hope and determination. Marcus will be participating in groundbreaking research that could not only help him, but potentially provide treatments for thousands of other children and families facing this condition. Marcus himself then spoke, his young voice clear and confident as he delivered the words he had practiced with his parents. I want other kids who have invisible dragon diseases to know they're not alone. My family and I are going to fight this dragon together, and we're going to help other kids fight their dragons too. The metaphor that had begun as a family coping mechanism had evolved into a powerful symbol that would resonate with children and parents worldwide. The Dragon Fighters Foundation, announced simultaneously with Marcus's diagnosis, was established with an initial endowment from the royal family and commitments from several major corporations who had been moved by Marcus's story.
Dr. Vasquez appeared via video link from Barcelona to explain the experimental treatment program.
Prince Marcus represents hope for an entire generation of children affected by Huntington's disease and related conditions. His courage in participating in this research could accelerate the development of treatments that transform lives around the world. The questions from the media were largely respectful, focusing on the research opportunities and the family's plans for advocacy rather than dwelling on the darker aspects of the diagnosis. Marcus answered several questions himself, his natural charm and wisdom shining through as he explained his excitement about helping other kids fight their dragons. One journalist asked Charlotte about her decision to defer university to support her brother's treatment. Her response revealed the depth of character that would later make her one of the most beloved members of the royal family.
Family comes first, always, she said simply.
Marcus is facing the fight of his life, and there's nowhere else I'd rather be than by his side. University will be there when we're ready, but this opportunity to help my brother and other children might not come again. Edmund, when asked about his own sacrifices, responded with characteristic directness, Marcus would do the same for any of us.
That's what families do, we stick together when things get tough. The international response to the announcement was overwhelming.
Within hours, the palace was inundated with messages of support from world leaders, celebrities, medical professionals, and ordinary families affected by Huntington's disease. The Dragon Fighters Foundation website crashed from the volume of traffic as people sought information about the condition and ways to support research. More importantly for Marcus and his family, hundreds of letters began arriving from children around the world who were facing their own medical challenges. 8-year-old Sophie from Canada wrote to tell Marcus about her battle with cerebral palsy, calling herself a dragon fighter and asking for his advice about being brave during medical procedures. 10-year-old Ahmed from Egypt, who was dealing with muscular dystrophy, sent a drawing of himself and Marcus as knights fighting a dragon together.
12-year-old Emma from Australia, whose younger brother had autism, wrote to thank Marcus for making her feel less alone in worrying about her sibling.
The letters kept coming, and Marcus insisted on personally responding to as many as possible. His responses, carefully reviewed by his parents but written in his own words, became treasured possessions for the children who received them. His natural empathy and optimism shone through in every message.
Dear Sophie, read one typical response, thank you for telling me about your dragon. It sounds like you're very brave fighting it.
I'm going to Spain soon to try magic medicine, but even if it doesn't work, we'll keep fighting together.
Dragons don't like it when kids help each other, so we have to stick together. Your friend, Prince Marcus.
As the family prepared for their relocation to Barcelona for Marcus's treatment, the logistics proved complex but manageable. Alexander would maintain his royal duties through remote communication and periodic returns to the kingdom, while Isabella would oversee Marcus's care full-time. Charlotte had indeed deferred her university acceptance and would serve as an unofficial ambassador for the Dragon Fighters Foundation.
Edmund would continue his education through a combination of tutoring and online courses. The farewell ceremony at Eldermere Castle was emotional but hopeful.
Hundreds of well-wishers gathered outside the castle gates, many holding signs with messages of support and hope. Marcus seemed energized rather than overwhelmed by the attention, waving enthusiastically and stopping to accept flowers and small gifts from children in the crowd. "We'll be back," he promised during a brief farewell statement.
"And, hopefully, we'll bring good news about dragon medicine for everyone." The flight to Barcelona marked the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in the royal family's life.
Dr. Vasquez and her team had prepared a comprehensive treatment protocol that would span 6 months, with the possibility of extension depending on Marcus's response to the therapy. The research facility in Barcelona was state-of-the-art, but Dr. Vasquez and her colleagues had made special efforts to create a welcoming environment for their young patient. Marcus's treatment room was decorated with knight and dragon themes, and he was given a special journal to record his experiences during the treatment process. "This journal will be very important, Dr. Vasquez explained during their first meeting at the facility. "Other doctors and researchers around the world will want to know how the treatment made you feel, what side effects you experienced, and how your symptoms changed. You're going to help us understand how to help other children." Marcus took the responsibility seriously, asking thoughtful questions about what information would be most helpful for other dragon fighters. His first journal entry read, "Day 1 in Spain. The doctors seem very nice and they have a machine that looks like a friendly robot. I'm a little scared but mostly excited to help other kids fight their dragons. The food here is different but good." The treatment itself was more complex than the family had anticipated. The gene therapy required precise timing and careful monitoring, with daily blood tests and regular brain scans to track Marcus's progress. Some days were difficult, with side effects that left him tired and nauseous. But Marcus's spirits remained remarkably high, bolstered by the constant stream of letters from children around the world and visits from his siblings. Charlotte had thrown herself into foundation work with impressive dedication, organizing fundraising events and awareness campaigns from their temporary base in Barcelona. She had also begun working on a children's book about Marcus's experience, hoping to create a resource for other families facing similar diagnoses. Edmund had become something of a medical research enthusiast, spending hours reading scientific papers and asking detailed questions about the treatment process. His curiosity and analytical mind impressed the research team, who began including him in some of their planning discussions. Alexander and Isabella watched their children's growth with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. The experience was changing all of them in profound ways, forcing them to confront questions about mortality, purpose, and the meaning of service that went far beyond their royal training. 3 months into the treatment, the first significant breakthrough came. Marcus's latest brain scan showed not just a halt in the disease's progression, but actual improvement in some areas that had previously shown damage. Dr. Vasquez was cautiously optimistic but emphasized that they needed more time to fully understand the implications. "We're seeing changes that we hoped for but didn't dare expect this early in the treatment," she explained during a video conference with the research team. "Marcus's response has been remarkable, but we need to continue monitoring and adjusting the protocol." The news was shared carefully with the public, emphasizing that while the early results were encouraging, much work remained to be done. The announcement sparked renewed interest in Huntington's disease research, with funding for related studies increasing dramatically around the world. Marcus himself seemed less interested in the medical details than in the letters that continued to arrive from his growing network of dragon fighter friends. He had established pen-pal relationships with dozens of children facing various medical challenges, and their mutual support had become a bright spot in his daily routine. "I got a letter from Sofia in Italy today," he told his parents during one of their evening family meetings. "Her dragon is different from mine, but she says the magic medicine is helping her too. She wants to know if we can have a dragon fighter meeting someday where everyone can come and share their stories." The idea of a dragon fighter conference was embraced by the foundation, leading to plans for an annual gathering that would bring together children with various medical conditions, their families, and researchers working to develop new treatments. The first conference was scheduled for the following year, with Barcelona selected as the host city in honor of Marcus's groundbreaking treatment. As Marcus's 6-month treatment program drew to a close, the results exceeded everyone's most optimistic expectations. Not only had the gene therapy halted the progression of his Huntington's disease, but it had actually reversed some of the early damage. More importantly, the treatment protocol developed through Marcus's case was showing similar success in other young patients who had begun participating in expanded trials. Dr. Vasquez's research team was preparing to publish their findings in the most prestigious medical journals, with Marcus's case serving as the foundation for a new standard of care for childhood-onset Huntington's disease. The experimental treatment was moving rapidly toward clinical trials that could make it available to children around the world. The family's return to Eldermere Castle was triumphant, with crowds lining the route from the airport to welcome home their young prince who had become a symbol of hope for families everywhere. Marcus, now 9 years old and noticeably more mature from his months of treatment and correspondence with children around the world, seemed to take the attention in stride. "We're home," he said during a brief statement upon their arrival. "But the dragon fighting isn't over. Now we have to help make sure all the other kids can get the magic medicine too." The Dragon Fighters Foundation had grown beyond anyone's imagination during their time in Barcelona, with chapters established in over 30 countries and millions of dollars raised for research into childhood neurological conditions. Marcus had become an inadvertent but effective advocate, his natural charisma and genuine empathy making him a powerful voice for children facing medical challenges. As the family settled back into life at Eldermere, they reflected on how much they had all changed during their journey. Marcus's health prognosis had improved dramatically, but, more importantly, their experience had given them a sense of purpose that went far beyond their traditional royal duties. "We've learned that the crown isn't just about ceremony and tradition," Alexander told Isabella as they walked through the castle gardens on their first evening home. "It's about using whatever platform we have to help people, especially those who need advocates." Marcus's story was far from over, but the crisis that had brought them to Barcelona had evolved into an opportunity to make a lasting difference in the lives of children and families around the world. The dragon that had seemed so terrifying 9 months earlier had indeed become a helper in disguise, leading them to discoveries that would benefit countless others. The young prince who had faced his diagnosis with courage and compassion had not only found healing for himself but had sparked a global movement that would continue to grow and evolve in the years to come. His dragon had been tamed, and, in the process, he had learned to help others tame their own.